Welcome to Module 4 of the DevOps Foundation course. We're going to talk about DevOps in relation to other business and technology frameworks. So that's really just a diagram of the topics again. So everything kind of from the perspective of DevOps, how it relates to Agile, SRE, Lean, ITSM, BSM. So let's start with Agile. Agile's really been defined as, from a manifesto, they call it, right? A declaration by the founders of Agile of what Agile is all about, what the values are, and so on. So the underlying concepts are laid out in the Agile manifesto, and this has been active for some years. So the general idea is Agile wants to emphasize that it's more important to be Agile rather than do Agile. In other words, it's more important to, live the values and not worry too much about process per se, as long as you're living the values. So the values are being customer centric, really trying to get customer involvement in what you're doing and get feedback quickly. Be lean, so don't have a lot of waste. Be collaborative, a lot of communication. Be ready to adapt when circumstances warrant it. Measure your progress. Work consistently and focus on results rather than the process, and definitely be reflective. Try to learn from, as you go, what can you learn from what you've done. There's an element of Agile that's very important. They say we value individuals and interactions over process and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiations, and we value responding to change over following a plan. So that's often misunderstood. I mean, it's not saying that these things on the right are not important. It didn't say instead of, it's saying that, when it comes down to it, these values are, a higher importance than having these things. It's not saying don't have those things. And I think that's often misunderstood. You definitely should have processes and tools, documentation, contracts when you have suppliers, and you need a plan. So be careful how you interpret that. But generally speaking, the manifesto is emphasizing the things on the left are really sacrosanct and valued. Typically associated with Agile is a Scrum framework. As in most organizations, they implement the Agile framework using Scrum. So Scrum is really a simple framework for team collaboration, how you break down complex projects and get work done. It emphasizes a set of rules that are considered just enough structure for teams to be able to focus on innovation, solving what might otherwise be insurmountable challenges. In other words, breaking down a big problem into small increments and working on them in increments. Otherwise, it may be overwhelming. So Scrum is the most commonly applied Agile software development practice. It's is simple, but it can be difficult to master because it does have very specific rules that you need to follow. It's not really a process or technique for building products, so that may be confusing. It's not about substituting, the need for good design or architecture and so on. It's really the process that you follow in order to build an increment. In general, Scrum increases the ability to release more frequently. And it has been proven over some years that if you're following Scrum, projects tend to be more successful than traditional waterfall approaches, for example, that look at large batches of changes at the same time. Okay, breaking down Scrum process a little more, there are really three key elements: roles, artifacts, and meetings. Under roles, there are three types of roles involved: a product owner, a Scrum master that's organizing, the operation of Scrum, and the development team that's doing the work. So there's three roles, and there are three things being produced: a product backlog that tells you what you're working on at any point in time, a sprint backlog that gives you what you're working on at this moment, and increment, which is the output of the sprint. So three artifacts. And there are also meetings. So there's actually 5 types of meetings associated with Scrum: a sprint meeting, a sprint planning meeting, a daily Scrum meeting, a sprint review, and a sprint retrospective. So we have a chart in the next slide, kind of gives you a diagrammatic view of that. So you have the 3 roles: the development team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. You have 3 artifacts, which again are, the different meetings, 5 meetings. So sprint planning meeting, daily Scrum meeting, sprint review, retrospective, and backlog is an artifact. Product backlog and finished work are the artifacts. The question you might ask, well, where does IT operations fit in, or for that matter, security or other functions? They're usually considered part of the development team in this model, and they definitely should be represented at least. The product backlog is usually defined and written down in terms of stories. So stories are really short requirements or requests written from the perspective of an end user. That's why they're called user stories. Trying to, again, keep in mind the customer's view or the user's view at any point in time. There are a concept called epics, which are actually larger bodies of work that typically will involve multiple stories. And initiatives are collections of epics that drive towards a common goal. And finally, themes are very large focus areas that span the whole organization. So in a DevOps transformation example, for example, you may have a story to work on. I don't know, maybe you're introducing a new monitoring tool. So some portion of that, and then the epic might be, working on the monitoring tool, and the initiative might be or introducing monitoring to an application, and the theme might be across the organization. Example. There's a lot of challenges applying Agile for large organizations when you have to coordinate across multiple teams. And even, in smaller teams sometimes. So culture, clearly the Agile approach works best with a culture and that doesn't, resist change. If you aren't doing Agile already, you have to overcome the barriers to change. Getting coordination across multiple teams can be a challenge. Trying to maintain consistency and alignment about how work is being done. That's where the Scrum Masters tend to come into play. Integration with legacy systems. So sometimes breaking down applying Scrum in a system that doesn't have modular architectures can be challenging. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but it can be challenging. Allocating resources and managing resources. Communication, collaboration, improving that because it definitely depends on good communication. Measurements for performance and success need to be put in place. Budgeting and financial planning can be an issue if you don't want to have to budget for every sprint, for example. So you have to have more of a product view of your budgeting process. Governance and compliance, making sure that you've got clear rules for governance and compliance, and how you're going to be meeting the compliance requirements. Underlying tooling and infrastructure, making sure you've got that in place. Understanding system requirements, even though this idea of working software over documentation doesn't mean you shouldn't have system requirements. You definitely do need system requirements well thought through. And then executing releases across multiple teams can be a challenge when you've got, let's say, a service that has multiple microservices, and every microservice has its own Scrum team. So that coordination can be a challenge.